So please, Robert Stone, if you could join me on stage.
Thank you.
Welcome to Stockholm.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And thank you for your amazing and perhaps provocative film. Can I ask you first, of all the reactions and responses that you've had to this film, what surprised you the most?
I think the most surprising thing to me is the lack of contention about this among people who see the film. I don't know, in this audience, I'm not going to assume anything. But from the very first, we premiered the film at the Sundance Film Festival in January. And Sundance, as some of you may know, it's run by Robert Redford. It's kind of a hotbed of environmental activism. And so I took a poll of the audience before the film started. And I said, how many people in the audience, if you were stopped on the street today and asked if you were in favor of nuclear power, against it, would say you're against? And 80% of the hands went up. I was actually surprised it wasn't more, but 80% of the hands went up. And then, so we showed the film, and then I did my talk after the film, and I said afterwards, I said, how many of the people in the audience tonight, if President Obama, and we were expecting President Obama to make a major speech on climate change, how many of the people in the audience, if President Obama, in his expected address on climate change, called for a renewed effort for advanced nuclear technology to combat climate change, would support that effort? And it had flipped completely the other way.
80-20.
Yeah. So, and this has been really consistent in where I've taken the film, and I've taken it all over the world now.
And what's your conclusion? Is it that public opinion is very wobbly on this issue?
I think, particularly among young people, I think there's a perception, and I shared it. I should let you know, I've been anti-nuclear my whole life. The last time I was in Stockholm was to promote an anti-nuclear documentary that I made that launched my career 25 years ago. Got nominated for an Oscar, by the way, and started my whole career. So I come out of this whole world myself. I forgot your question. I wanted you to know that.
No, what's your conclusion? The polls.
I think among liberals, progressives, being anti-nuclear is just part of the program. So it's a widely held belief, but it's not really a very informed one. And that older people who grew up during the Cold War are the ones who are more cling to this idea more. I mean, as I did, I think out of a conflation of nuclear power with nuclear weapons. And so the existential threat that they grew up with was an attack from the Soviet Union, and that really messes with your head. And the existential threat that younger people have grown up with is climate change. So it's a very different perspective on this.
Please take a seat.
Yeah. You want me to sit here or here? Or?
There.
There, okay.
And what about Fukushima, for instance? How does that play into this public opinion?
Well, Fukushima happened when I was in the middle of production, actually.
So you started doing
the film before? Absolutely. So that was a big issue that I needed to bring into the film, because I knew people would come into the film with that sort of experience foremost in their minds. But clearly it's been a setback. It has raised the issue of safety back up, and it's hard to remember now, but before Fukushima, the whole issue of safety had really faded away. The last major accident, the only really big one we had, the 3 Mile Island didn't have any epidemiological and very tiny release of radiation. Chernobyl was a biggie, but it faded, and arguably it was a one-off crazy Soviet bomb factory, basically. You could argue that that's a one-off thing. And I was told repeatedly that this kind of event could not happen at a Western reactor.
But Japan is the most technically advanced country we have.
Yeah, and I think that shocked people and has been a setback. However, there's not a single nuclear power plant in the world that was on the books to move forward that has been canceled as a result of Fukushima, which is interesting. And and I think there may be a silver lining on this, One silver lining is that I think it's reawakened a concern about safety and regulatory frameworks that's important to remember. You know, this is a complex technology. Like, for instance, the Chinese were moving ahead very, very rapidly, and they halted it completely. They put a sort of moratorium for a year. They really re-examined their regulatory framework. They really re-examined the safety of the reactors. And according to the people I know who have examined what they've done a really good job. And I think I think that's a good thing. It's a good thing. We should be, this is a complex technology that needs to be taken seriously.
But you paint a rather rosy picture of this fourth generation of reactors.
I don't think I paint a rosy picture. I think I paint a picture that is...
Or your spokesman.
No, I'm not a spokesman. Look, I don't see myself as advocating this technology for its own sake.
Not you, but the people who speak out in the movie.
Well, they are. They're the scientists who developed this thing. But I'm saying, as a filmmaker, I made this film because nuclear power is a tool to solve a problem. Just as wind is a tool, and solar is a tool, and energy efficiency is a tool. These are all tools to solve problems. And one of the things that I think we environmentalists have lost sight of sometimes is seeing wind and solar as an end in itself. Like, the goal is more wind, the goal is more solar. That's not the goal. The goal is to get rid of fossil fuels. And nuclear, if you simply do the math about how much energy we need, we are adding the energy equivalent of another Brazil to the planet every year. If you do the math, you simply cannot decarbonize the planet in the time that we have left to do it, and it's incumbent upon our generation to do this, without nuclear. So if you're anti-nuclear, we need to make nuclear power better. It shouldn't be no nukes, it should be better nukes. And fourth generation reactor technology is a promise that I think it's an amazing technology that solves so many of the problems that I think anti-nuclear people are concerned about.
And the word solartopia is introduced in the movie.
Right.
Do you believe that all the money spent on solar and wind power has been wasted on some sort of impossible dream? Or
I think trying to make Germany solar powered may not be the best place to do it. I've been to Germany many times. I don't think I've ever seen the sun. But
here is even worse.
Here is even worse. But it's very cloudy in Germany. But yes, look, there are obviously some places where solar energy works great. And there are going to be some places where the wind works great. Offshore wind in the North Sea, for instance, is doing very well. It's very shallow water. There's a lot of wind. It's great. But this is not a one-size-fits-all kind of situation. But if you want to power a planet of going on 9, maybe 10 billion people, 2 billion of whom have no electricity at all, another 2 billion, maybe more, don't have enough electricity, and another 2 billion yet to be born, there's simply no way that you can do that just with wind and solar. And there's no way that we're going to reduce our energy consumption through efficiency. So we have to at least have this conversation.
Right, and we know that the climate crisis is getting worse all the time, with the concentrations of CO2 in the atmosphere, the highest in recorded history and so on. Is it your belief that a massive expansion of nuclear power could turn that development around?
Well, look, 3 weeks ago, 4 of the world's leading climate scientists, including Dr. James Hansen, who's arguably the world's most renowned climate scientist who brought it to the world's attention, 25 years ago wrote an open letter to the leaders of the environmental movement in the world, pleading with them to support the deployment and development of advanced nuclear technology to combat climate change for this very reason. That, it may be that there is no way through the woods here. It may be that we've gone too far. That's possible. I don't think so. I think there is a way out of this, but it's a narrow path, and it does involve putting everything on the table, every technology we have that can aid in eliminating fossil fuels. And nuclear is going to play a big role. And in terms of can this be done, I think you look at Sweden and you look at France. They're the only 2 countries in the entire world that have decarbonized their electric grids. And both countries did it with a rapid and massive deployment of nuclear power, and they did it within the time frame that we have left. So if these two large industrial countries can do it, it's totally possible to do, but it does require political will, and it requires making these things in mass quantity, a commitment to do it, which is what Sweden did and what France did.
And a change of public opinion?
Absolutely, and that's my role. Yes, absolutely. My role is to start a conversation among those people who are most concerned about climate change, who are most active in terms of deciding and influencing energy policy, to open their minds, at least beginning to have this conversation, because it's a conversation we have not been having. There's been, it's almost become taboo to even say the word nuclear. And what I've found, I've just stood up and said it, okay, as the people of my film have. What I have found is it's for a large percentage of the people that I show this film to, this has become like a breath of fresh air into a very, very stale conversation about climate change and renewable energy. We've been having the same conversation for 25 years. As you said, everything's trending in the wrong direction. The shocker is coal is the fastest growing source of energy on the planet.
Right.
How can that be after 25 years?
And when you speak about people who change their mind on nuclear power, you talk about defection. Like defectors from communism or some sort of belief
I prefer the word conversion maybe than defection.
That's even more religious.
Well, look, it is a conversion. I've never been an activist. I'm a filmmaker. I'm not a political activist. I've never protested. I come from a more sort of background as a historian, journalist, filmmaker person. So for me, this was not a great leap of faith. It was just more of an analytical realization that everything that we've been doing to combat climate change for the last 25 years has failed. I think everybody would admit that, whatever your perspective. What we're doing right now is failing us.
But have you paid a price for it too? I mean, people attacking you on Facebook or things like that?
Well, it's kind of, as somebody who's been, my last film was like a loving portrait of the history of the environmental movement, so it's a little strange to be attacked by environmentalists. But the attacks on me have come from either professional anti-nuclear activists or people who haven't seen the film. People who have seen the film, even people who are anti-nuclear, who've seen the film and who remain anti-nuclear after having seen the film, have shaken my hand and congratulated me and admitted this is a good conversation we need to have. And it's all been very, very friendly. I haven't lost any friends over this. It's been fine. You go on YouTube, you'll see videos of people screaming in the background. But it's like one or two people will stand up and scream and yell. But mostly we have a civil conversation, which is what I wanted to do.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
And what gave you the impulse, the inspiration to start doing a film with this sort of angle? Was it climate change or something else?
It came out of the last film that I made, which was this history of the environmental movement. Stuart Brand was in that movie as well.
Earth Days.
Earth Days, exactly. And it was, a couple of things happened. First of all, I started to think about environmental issues a lot more than I had been, and this realization that what we're doing to combat climate change is failing. So that a lot of the assumptions, the tools, the tactics that had been so effective with the environmental movement in tackling things like water pollution, air pollution, things like that, were not effective in tackling something like climate change. So that was one thing. And the other thing that impacted me just on a personal level was I got to know a lot of environmental activists and environmental leaders. And I'd take them to have a beer or two or three, and the next thing you know, I'm having a conversation with them, and they would tell me, every single one of them, without exception, privately, that they thought we were doomed. There was no way out of the climate crisis. It's all over. In 50, 100 years, the civilization's going to collapse. They were just absolutely apocalyptic. So here were people who were in positions of leadership who would go before the public and say, we can solve this problem with wind and solar and energy efficiency, but privately they didn't believe it themselves. And the only people I found who didn't hold to this view, and particularly Stuart Brand being one of them, one of the first Greens to really come out publicly about this, said, you know what? there is a way through this. We do have a technological solution to this problem. There's a way through the woods. It's a narrow path. We may not get there. We can't get there without it. It's controversial among certain people, and it involves rethinking nuclear power and making nuclear power better, safer, cheaper, and that's the way through. And they were the ones who had hope. And interestingly, the other thing that impacted me, again on a personal level, is and this is purely anecdotal, I have no evidence for this as a survey, but a great many of the people who were the most apocalyptic did not have children. And that impacted me as a father, myself, a lot. I feel what I'm doing is I want to be able to look my children in the eye in 20 years, whatever happens, and say, I did everything I could. I put everything on the table to solve this problem.
I heard that when you were a small child yourself, your mother read the book Silent Spring.
That's right.
To you.
Yeah, when I was 8 years old. Yeah.
So you've been a part of and you follow the environmental movement.
Yeah, well,
ever since.
The first time I ever picked up a camera was for the first Earth Day in 1970. It was for a little school project. I borrowed my mom's Super 8 camera and I made a little film about pollution in my small town where I grew up. And so this has been a part of my life from a very early age. I mean, I've made films about lots of other things, but it's something that's I have a deep personal commitment to.
But on the issue of nuclear power, then you think that the movement got it wrong?
Got it. Yes, I think the movement got it wrong, and I think the movement got it wrong, and I think in a small way I was a part of that.
But are there more issues that you think where there should be a new orientation?
Well, I think there's some basic fundamental assumptions that underlie this. It's not just a matter of getting nuclear power wrong. It's about one of the biggest assumptions that I think we were wrong about, and I'll just try to go through these very quickly because it's important. We thought that energy, supplying human beings with abundant energy would increase the human incursion into the natural world. So nature good, man bad, give man more energy, man goes further into destroying the natural world. Therefore, if we can restrain humanity by limiting our energy use to the natural forces of the wind and the sun, that would be a good thing.
Poor.
Well, yeah, but energy austerity. That energy austerity was a good thing. And as it turns out, as we've seen what's happened in the developing world over the last 25 years, those areas of the world that have the least amount of energy have the highest birth rates. And those areas with the highest amount of energy, lower birth rates. Also, you lift people out of poverty, middle class, these become better stewards of the environment. So in fact, the opposite turns out to be true, if you believe, as I do, that human population is the key driver here.
But you have a stunning example in Pandora's Promise that an iPhone consumes as much energy as a refrigerator, I think. But isn't that telling you that there is a point in changing personal habits as well, or energy austerity?
Okay, is anybody in this auditorium going to give up their iPhone for the sake of the planet? I don't think I've always asked this question. Nobody will. No, look.
But more efficient iPhones, perhaps.
No, but the whole history of the Industrial Revolution, for 200 years, it's a steady progression of us becoming more and more efficient at the use of energy. At the same time, you've seen a steady rise in the use of energy. So this is something that we environmentalists got wrong, was this idea that we could reduce overall energy demand through energy efficiency. And energy efficiency is a great thing. It's important. We need to keep pursuing it. But it has not. The only time that overall energy demand has ever gone down has been in moments of economic recession. And the explosion of energy in the developing world throws any efficiency savings that we in the developed world enact, it renders it almost irrelevant in terms of the bigger picture. It's not to say it's not important, but we cannot rely on that to for instance, displace nuclear power, as a lot of people do, or to displace fossil fuels. That's not going to happen.
Right. In Greek mythology, Pandora was the first woman, I think, and she opened this box with misfortune and curses and so on. Isn't that a sort of timeless warning not to rely too heavily on science and technology, do you think?
Well,
Or how do you
we're way
interpret it?
past relying on science. We're living in an electronic atmosphere here. We just watched a movie with, I mean, we all live, we have passed that point. We're not going to go back to live in caves. I called the film Pandora's Promise because I felt it's important to acknowledge that, you know, the discovery of the atom has released bad things into the world, like nuclear weapons. Absolutely, that's true. That's true. That has to be acknowledged. However, it does, at the bottom of the box, she does find hope. She was also Prometheus' wife, who stole fire from the gods. So it seemed like an apt metaphor. But you know, all of these energy sources, again, these are all tools. You can pick any energy source you want, and you could go down the list of all the things you don't like about it. And there's a lot to not like about all of them once you start to scale them up to massive scales. The thing about nuclear that is appealing to those, you know, particularly in the scientific community, really understand it, is it gets down to E equals mc squared. You get a massive amount of energy out of a very, very, very tiny resource. And that carries on through the whole cycle, from the extraction point, production of energy, and including, as we pointed out, to the waste, which then we now know how to recycle. So that football field of waste, which you've accumulated, which is amazingly small. I always thought, everybody talked about mountains of waste. Imagine like big rusty cans of waste leaking, you know, piled miles high. What's a small amount? But we can, if we recycle that using fourth-generation reactors, we could power all of the United States at today's level, including the transportation sector, for 1,000 years. 1,000 years. And I'll tell you just one other thing that was the most impactful, like mind-blowing thing for me when I made the film, which was related to this. I was ushered into the room in France where they keep all of their high-level waste. There's a short scene in the film there. And you saw those little tubes. They're like 1 meter wide, they're 10 meters deep, vitrified glass wrapped in stainless steel, sunk into the floor. And I asked the guy there, I said, how many of these tubes are what's left from powering the city of Paris for the last 30 years? 4 tubes. 4 tubes. That just blew my mind. I mean, you think about, I mean, you don't see it in Sweden because you guys are nuclear and hydro, but in most countries of the world, just billowing smoke into the sky every day. And you compare that to this tiny amount of waste, that's E equals mc squared in a nutshell.
And this fourth generation of reactors, there really aren't any countries that has pulled this off yet.
Not commercially.
Politically,
the Russians,
economically, technically.
Yeah, I mean, look, largely because we, those people who were, you know, anti-nuclear activists and politically active fighting this technology, stopped all the R&D 20 years ago. Those reactors were scheduled to come online and be commercially available around now. So we, you know, there's a lot to answer for in that one.
Was that the background to, we saw John Kerry making the speech when they shut it down in '94.
Absolutely, and this happened in Sweden as well. It happened all over the world. And right now you've got, and we're facing a real crisis in terms of the passing on this energy technology. You've got people in their 70s and you've got people in their 20s. And there's a rapid transfer of knowledge right now that's happening.
So you're making up for old sins with this movie then?
Yeah, well, you know, look, the Chinese are going ahead with every advanced reactor design known to man. The Russians are moving ahead. There's a lot of activity in design in the United States. And I think there's a lot of excitement around this, in part because there's an acknowledgement that we need this to solve this very, very immediate crisis, and there's only so many tools we have. You know, it's always easy to imagine, you know, some better technology 20 years ahead. We have to work with what we have today, and we can't kick the can down the road for the next generation to solve this problem. We've got to solve it ourselves right now.
The fact that women, on average, are a bit more skeptical to nuclear power than men, how do you interpret that?
I think Gwyneth Craven's answered that quite well in the film. I think, you know, I think it's just a natural human instinct to consider, and it's great, you know, vive la différence, as they say in France. We have a different outlook, and it's a hurdle, absolutely. The fear, you know, when you're talking about your children, I mean, my God, you know, we all of us care about the future of our children. If something is, we're told that something is dangerous, that something might harm our children in any kind of way, that brings forth a very, very strong impulse in men and women. Thank you. As it turns out, if you weigh the risks of all these technologies, all these energy technologies, nuclear turns out, even in the crazy way that it's been developed so far, which we were critical of in the film, is still just about the safest form of energy we have. Safer even per unit of energy produced than solar, which is incredible, but actually true. Yeah.
And France, as you mentioned, it is hailed as a shining example in the film. Have you shown your film there yet? And what
I just came from there, yeah.
Yeah. What are the reactions there?
Well, France, interestingly, has a burgeoning anti-nuclear movement now, and President Hollande has vowed to bring it down to 50%. I don't think that'll ever happen, and he's the most unpopular president in the history of France. So, it does indicate that was a politically expedient thing for him to say in order to get elected, as we have in Germany with Angela Merkel. But you know, maybe it's a generational thing. It's like young people are anti-nuclear because their parents are pro-nuclear. I don't know. I mean, I am interested to hear the opinion in Sweden, because Sweden really did the same thing. I mean, there's a lot more hydro here, but Sweden and France are the two examples to the world about how you decarbonize your electric grid. I mean, Sweden should be incredibly proud to have a zero carbon electric grid. That should be something that you should stand up and be, no country in the world has done that. France even has a couple of coal plants. I mean, this should be something that's an incredible source of national pride. So to see so many Swedes be anti-nuclear is surprising to me.
I think it's about 50-50.
That's shocking.
Today.
That's surprising to me, because it's just an incredible success story. I see a lot of rumbling out there.
We'll get around to questions from the floor soon, then we'll get to see. But your message is very optimistic. I mean, with all these lights being lit up all over the world. Are you really that optimistic about the future when you look at...
Well, the optimism doesn't spread from the lights lighting up around the world. It's important to note that globe is going to light up, regardless of whether we use nuclear power, because we've spent so much time in the last few decades, rather than putting R&D money into nuclear energy and other technologies, non-CO2 emitting technologies, we put a lot of R&D into extracting more and more fossil fuels. So fossil fuels remain very cheap, remain very abundant, and that world is going to light up. But if it lights up with fossil fuels, as it is happening right now, rapidly before our eyes, we are toast. We are toast. The people alive in this room tonight are going to face an absolutely terrifying future if we don't do something. So it's not that that's a world that's going to light up with nuclear power. It's a world that's lighting up, and it's incumbent upon us to make sure that it's lit up with clean energy, non-CO2 emitting energy. That is the greatest challenge of our generation, to make sure that happens.
And peaceful nuclear energy, hopefully.
Of course.
Only hours ago, we had this deal between Iran and the big powers. Do you think that plays a role for the civil use of nuclear power?
I think it's very encouraging, as you see that sanctions do work. I mean, if a country falls outside of what's considered national norms on this kind of thing, that they can be punished and brought to the table. It's important to recognize, however, that Iran has a commercial nuclear power plant called Bashir that's running fine, and they have it, but they are not using that nuclear power plant to make a weapon. What they've been doing is spinning, because the nuclear fuel is about 3% pure uranium. In order to create a bomb, you need something over 90-95% pure uranium. It's a very different fuel. So they're taking raw uranium, spinning centrifuges. No country in the world has ever used a commercial nuclear power plant to make a nuclear weapon. It's the worst possible way, the most costly way to do it. So the connection between the two, that if people have nuclear power, they can make nuclear weapons, is not the connection that I assumed it to be when I was a lot younger, even up until maybe 5-10 years ago.
But are you really that confident that the spread of civilian nuclear technology might also mean proliferation?
But it's already out there. It's already out there. As we pointed out in the film, there's 38 countries, I think, in the world right now who could go ahead and make a nuclear weapon. Who's doing it? Well, North Korea and Iran, but maybe Iran's backing out. Does anybody here think that if Sweden got rid of all of its nuclear power plants, that the mullahs in Iran would change their course one way or the other? Of course not. And the other good thing, look, the other good thing...
But Sweden nearly got a bomb in the 50s.
What does that have to do with anything?
just to remind us.
Look, in order to solve climate change, we do not need to have nuclear power tomorrow in every country in the world. It is a crazy fluke of history that we should all take advantage of, that those countries that produce the most CO2 already have nuclear weapons. If just those countries really went ahead with nuclear power in the next 20 years and decarbonized their electric grids, not just with nuclear, wind, solar, whatever they can do, that did that, that alone would see us through the woods. That would solve the bulk of the problem, because, India and China in particular, Western Europe, United States, that would solve the bulk of the problem. Let the rest of the world burn fossil fuels for the next 20, 30 years. Get themselves out of poverty. At that point, if we keep going with the fourth generation reactors, they will have inherently safe, almost like nuclear battery technology. You can put them into developing countries or underdeveloped countries. They don't even need human operators, some of these. And they can then transition away from fossil fuels. But you do not need... Advocating for nuclear power now does not mean that you build gargantuan, nuclear power plants in Namibia. That's not necessary to solve this problem.
And also this last weekend, the climate talks in Warsaw was stalled, not surprisingly. What do you think about that process? Is it possible to reduce emissions and agree in the sort of United Nations framework, or do we need some radically new approach in the world?
Well, we have a whole scene about that in the film. I think it hasn't worked so far, and it's basically what you're trying to do with these agreements is you're basically trying to raise energy prices voluntarily, whether it's through a carbon tax or cap and trade or any of these schemes, or any of these schemes are basically raising the price on fossil fuels, and that's a very difficult thing for people to willingly vote for, particularly in times of economic, crisis as we are in, around the world. A lot of economists say this is going to be the new normal. This is, the good times are not going to be here again. It's a tricky one. I don't think it's going to happen, and I don't think we should rely on that mechanism of happening, because it has failed us. It's another thing that has failed for 25 years.
Thanks. Okay, let's see if there are any questions from anyone else. I think we have a microphone around in that case. Yes, I think over there.
Thank you. My name is Isadora Vronsky. I come from Greenpeace, so I'm probably one of the few environmentalists in the room.
Could you wave your hand so I can see? I can't see where you... Oh,
here.
There. Okay.
Yeah.
Hi.
Well, you said, if you do the math right, you can't decarbonize the planet without nuclear. Was one of your previous assumptions. And I'm wondering, with today's share of nuclear in the global primary energy, nuclear makes up 6% of the global primary energy share at the moment. Mm-hmm. How are you going to replace over 80% of fossil fuels with building nuclear power plants that takes more than 10 years and have an estimated today investment cost of 8 billion euros? What's the reality of doing that in time?
Well, how are you going to do it with wind and solar? What's the numbers on wind and solar? When you tell everybody that, that's the problem.
No, the numbers on wind and solar are lower.
That's right.
Yes.
I mean, that's the problem.
And
it's
it takes
below
less
1%.
time to build. So,
well, they don't. No, not per terawatt. They don't. There's no. Look, Germany put 130 billion euros into its solar investments over about 20 years. 15, 20 years. Germany has about half the world's supply of solar PV, great, and they're one of the richest countries in the world. They can afford to do that. The political class has gotten behind it, all very good. But they get 5% of their electricity on an annualized basis, 5% of electricity from solar, which is an amazing accomplishment, but that's 5% on a huge investment over several decades. France, over several decades, huge investment, not dissimilar, totally decarbonized their electric grid, as did Sweden. That's the problem. It's not that wind and solar can't contribute. It's not that this isn't a tremendous problem, as you pointed out, to displace fossil fuels. But we have to put. I think what you just said makes my case. You have to put everything on the table. Everything.
No, well, I see the opposite in your argument, because today you have about 25% renewable energy in Germany. That has happened over the course of a few years.
And how much of that is hydro? How much of that is hydro?
Well, you have 32 gigawatts of solar. You have about 30 gigawatts of wind.
No, let's deal with percentages. Let's deal with percentages. How much of what you said? How much is hydro? How much is wind? And how much is solar?
I don't have the exact percentage for hydro.
Okay, it's 5% wind. You should know because you work for Greenpeace. It's 5% wind. It's 5% solar, 7% wind. Then the rest is biomass and hydro. So you still got 12. Wind and solar is 12%. It's important, which is an incredible achievement, but why Germany is still building coal plants. They're burning the dirtiest coal in the world, and their CO2 emissions are going up. That is a fact.
Okay, one last short word from Greenpeace, if you like.
Well, I think that just to comment on the film in average, it makes me very confident that we're going towards a renewable future, because it shows the desperacy of the nuclear industry today, bringing out the arguments that you've just shown us today. In Sweden, a country with 50% renewable energy in the total energy mix.
50% hydro.
No, not 50% hydro. Yes. I was 50% in the overall energy mix.
You're 50% hydro, 50% nuclear.
Okay, thanks.
You should know this. You're Swedish, I assume.
Okay. Thanks a lot, both of you. Let's move on. If there's another question. Yes.
Yes, I have two sets of questions.
Again, I can't see.
Yeah, I'm over here.
Oh, there. Okay,
here.
Sorry, it's the lights.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I was wondering, do you consider nuclear to be a sustainable energy source, and what are your ideas around the word and the concept of sustainability?
I think, well, sustainability is something that can power human civilization for some extended period of time. And I think nuclear absolutely can do that. That football field that we show in the film of accumulated nuclear waste in the United States could power the United States for 1,000 years. They're using recycling the fuel. Thorium fuel cycle looks very promising as well. Going forward, there's enough thorium to power the world for thousands and thousands of years. We can even extract uranium from seawater. Believe it or not, uranium is extractable from seawater. There's really an abundance. In terms of, can we provide power to the entire planet for basically forever with nuclear energy? Yes, and I would suspect that before the end of the century, we'll probably have fusion, which will render the whole thing moot. We simply have to get over this hump in the next 50 years.
Thank you very much. I think we have to move on with the program now.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Robert Stone.
Thank you.
We're going to... Yeah.